Hello and welcome back to the Orlando Adventures podcast. I'm your host Russ, and today's episode is the Retro IOA one. So obviously I did the Retro Universal one a few weeks ago, and genuinely it was such a big hit, and everyone's been so kind with their feedback with regards to that podcast episode. So I figured, you know what, let's step next door. Let's go next door to IOA, and it's, to be honest with you, it's a little bit more difficult. It's a bit more difficult because Studios has had a lot of different rides over the years. It's had a lot of different rides replaced by different IPs or different theming, for example. And it was a bit more difficult for Islands of Adventure because realistically the park isn't as old, but also they haven't changed as many things in the actual land itself in terms of, like I said, the land, Islands of Adventure. But in terms of actually changing rides, they haven't changed as many. So this one's a little bit different. This is more kind of like going through the ages of kind of like what was at Islands of Adventure when it opened. And if stuff has changed over the years, I've tried to like kind of look it up as well. So as you head into Islands of Adventure, the first thing that you basically come to is the lake. So obviously the landscape of what you would have seen over the lake from 1999 when the park opened to now is probably very different. But back in the day, there was actually a thing called Island Skipper Tours. So you could actually like get on a boat hosted by an employee or a skipper, and you basically traveled across the central lagoon of the park. And you were basically able to get from Port of Entry to Jurassic Park. And I mean, this is such a cool idea. I think it's a fantastic way of getting from kind of A to B in the park. But unfortunately, this was closed in 2001. So they only actually kept this as a feature for 2 years. They obviously decided that, you know what, this is not worth the upkeep. The amount of people actually using it isn't worthwhile. It was probably slow turnaround. I mean, you know, it's one of those things that by the time you waited for the boat, got on the boat, got off the boat, you probably could have walked to the other side of the park anyway. But I appreciate not everyone wants to walk around the park. I get it. It's all good. But yeah, so that's the first kind of thing that I came across. I'm going to try and head kind of clockwise around the park. The reason why I'll head clockwise is because Seuss Landing hasn't had a huge amount in terms of change over the years. So there is one thing, but I'll basically get to that at the end. So I'll go clockwise. And the first thing that you come to in Islands of Adventure that has had a change over the years is the Incredible Hulk roller coaster. So a lot of you may not know, but actually in, I think it was 2015, they actually closed the Hulk roller coaster. They completely dismantled it. They took the whole thing down and they retracked the entirety of the ride. And then they reopened it with new theming and a new story inside of the actual ride itself. But the ride itself is fundamentally the same. And being 2015, it opened in 1999. It'd been up for 16 years. And at which point, a lot of people were saying it was rough. A lot of people were saying that it potentially wasn't enjoyable or as enjoyable a roller coaster as it potentially once was. They obviously opted to retrack it. And we've gone into the Marvel rights situation before, and obviously at which point in 2015 you're talking like Age of Ultron was coming out, so your second Avengers film, Disney with Marvel are like going strong, so Universal certainly weren't going to want to let go of this, so they opted to retrack it, retheme it, and basically refresh it. The next thing that you come to is the Spider-Man ride. So this is a lot of people's favorite. This is a lot of people's favorite 3D ride, a lot of people's potential favorite 4D ride, a lot of people's favorite kind of simulator ride in the park, or any park for that matter, whether or not it's because it's Spider-Man or whether or not it's because of the actual technology they use in the ride. You know, it's a fabulous ride. It really is. And for anyone who is a comic book, Marvel, Spider-Man fan, you're going to love this ride. And in 2012, that's when they opted to do new screens on the ride. So they updated it so that the screens were so much better. I think at the time, obviously, you know, those screens have been around for 13 years. They potentially had aged a bit too much and it was just getting a bit tired. So they opted to go for a full new screen technology. And I mean, to this day, 12 years on from that, it still stands the test of time as one of the best rides in the park. It's a fantastic ride. It's a must do for so many people. I love it. I love it. As I've said many times before, it will always be a must do for me. The next thing that we come to, so we're going to head out of Marvel Superhero Island. We're going to head around the park to the next section, which is Toon Lagoon. Just before we get to Toon Lagoon, there used to be a thing called the Pandemonium Cartoon Circus. And basically, it was a live stage show located in the now vacant Toon Lagoon Amphitheatre. And that opened with the park in 1999. It was basically kind of a series of circus acts starring various cartoon and comic strip characters from Toon Lagoon. You had characters such as Woody Woodpecker, Popeye, Olive Oyl, Bluto, Blondie, Dagwood, Dudley Do-Right, and other characters amongst that. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know a lot of these characters. I only know them from going into Islands of Adventure and Toon Lagoon. But ultimately, this was closed in 2000. So it wasn't even open long. It was open like half a year to a year, if that. It was then replaced by a thing called Extreme Adventure. Extreme Adventure was basically a BMX themed stunt show that operated from 2000 to 2001. It was basically BMX riders, inline skaters, skateboarders, and apparently there was even a random appearance by Woody Woodpecker as well. For whatever reason, they decided to mix Woody Woodpecker with BMXs. I'm not quite sure. That ultimately ran until 2001. In 2002, they replaced it with a thing called Matt Hoffman's Crazy Freaking Stunt Show. How American. Fantastic. I mean, wicked. Like, Matt Hoffman, I think at the time was quite a big BMX rider. So he basically did this show. He starred in it. It ran from 2002 to 2004. And apparently they had various issues with this attraction, hence why they closed it in the end, with regards to either people actually going to watch it, people being interested in it, and a lot of people didn't apparently like the inappropriate word freaking in the title, which is kind of fair enough. But yeah, so that ended up closing in 2004. That was rethemed to another Matt Hoffman BMX show called Matt Hoffman's Agro Circus. That was a seasonal BMX stunt show. From what I can understand, that operated from 2010 to 2011. So there was a little bit of a gap actually between the two Matt Hoffman shows, from what I can understand. And I've looked into this, but I can't find huge amounts of detail on it. This was basically BMX, skateboarding, stunt tricks under like a circus theme as well. But up to this day, the amphitheater in Toon Lagoon is actually closed. So there's potential. There's a potential space there to be able to do something with. And I will say that Islands of Adventure doesn't have a huge amount in terms of shows potentially to go and see. And I think that if there was something that they could certainly add to Islands of Adventure, it would be more shows, more of these kind of like sit down and just kind of get out of the rush of being on rides and queues and crowds and stuff, and just kind of go and have a sit down for 20 minutes, half an hour, and watch a fun show. There's obviously so many things they could do with it. I'm sure they've got loads of plans to do something with it, but we'll see in time. The next thing that was added was Kong Skull Island. So that never used to be essentially a thing. It was basically a space in the park where there was nothing, and it obviously sits between Toon Lagoon and Jurassic Park. I know that not everybody's a massive fan of Skull Island. I like it. I think the theming of it's fantastic. The only thing I will say is it is a little bit random. This opened, I think, 2016 off the top of my head. And this basically, it's only one ride, and they bill it as Skull Island, but it is just the one attraction. It's a bit of a shame because it blends quite nicely from the Jurassic kind of area. It doesn't blend at all into the Toon Lagoon bit, which is fine. It doesn't really matter necessarily, but at the same time, I feel like maybe they could have just put a couple of attractions in there, even if they put another smaller kind of like flat ride in there. I think just to have something a little bit extra would have been better than the ride and basically a food stall outside selling pretzels and that's it. I think they certainly could have expanded on it a little bit more than what they did, and appreciate the space that they've got was limited, but surely there would have been a better use of the space, considering obviously the Skull Island ride used to go outside. The bus used to take this little trip outside, and now doesn't do so. Well, it seems like such a shame and such a kind of like a waste of space that they opted to do this original go outside bit and have now just done away with it. So there's this whole essentially wasted space outside, not doing anything. The next thing that we're going to get to, obviously, is Jurassic World. So there is the Jurassic Park area, which obviously used to be all of the whole area where Velocicoaster now stands. But it didn't always used to be Jurassic World. It is now Jurassic Park and Jurassic World where Velocicoaster stands. Velocicoaster basically takes up a lot of space where there never used to be an awful lot there. However, there did used to be a thing called Triceratops Encounter, which was located in the Jurassic Park area. And basically you confront an animatronic Triceratops and you were able to like kind of pet the dinosaur as well. From what I can understand, there were 3 different Triceratops called Topper, Sira, and Chris. And unfortunately, the reason for this closing with the animatronics would break down quite a lot from what I could work out. It originally closed in 2003. It did open again in 2010 under a new name of Triceratops Discovery Trail. It then closed again quite soon after, and it opened again in 2011 back under the original name, but then eventually they closed it in 2012. They did put the Raptor Encounter in there, where in the same place, and that ultimately got moved in 2019. And obviously ready for Velocicoaster to be built in the space where that is. Velocicoaster is obviously built over the lake as well. So they basically tried to expand out in front of the Discovery Center as opposed to back into Jurassic Park itself. I tell you what, the next thing I'm going to do, because I'm going to finish in the Wizarding World, because the Wizarding World obviously is the biggest change, So let's kind of head back. Let's head back to Seuss Landing, and I said that there wasn't really any changes in there. Well, they originally in 1999 there was plans to have a twin-tracked monorail above Seuss Landing. This was going to be called Sylvester McDonkey McBean's Very Unusual Driving Machines. I don't even know what that is. I don't know what that name is. I don't know where they come up with it. Maybe it's a thing. I saw it and I'm like, what on earth were they on when they came up with this? And basically it was meant to open in 1999. It essentially never opened, and it was going to open in 99. Then they basically said it was going to open 2000 or 2001. Then the company who made this Donkey Bean or whatever it was called ride went bankrupt, unfortunately. So then eventually in 2005 they opted to retrack it, retheme it, and then do it as the Seuss High in the Sky trolley. So yeah, this is a bit of a strange one. When this one came up, I'm like, what was this? And it turns out it's because it was never built. Really bizarre, really bizarre. But heading from Seuss, let's go to Lost Continent. Lost Continent was a big area. Lost Continent, and to be honest with you, back in the day in 1999, I expect this area was wicked. I think it was probably so cool, and there was so much in there. The scale and the theming was probably like unmatched in a lot of theme parks anywhere. And ultimately, if you go into Lost Continent now, there's really not a lot in there. There's kind of the Mythos restaurant. There's quite a few like statues and facades and stuff. But in terms of attractions, I actually don't think there are any. Well, there used to be Poseidon's Fury. So Poseidon's Fury was a special effect walkthrough attraction that was located in the Lost City section of Lost Continent. And this opened with the park in 1999. It used to have a story where it was basically a story about the lost city of Atlantis, and there was a battle between Zeus and Poseidon. And then eventually it did get rethemed to a slightly different storyline, but ultimately it had the same effects. It had the same kind of main crux to it. It's just that they changed Poseidon so that he was actually the hero of the story. And in the old one, I think he was the villain. But yeah, So unfortunately, Poseidon's Fury actually closed in 2023, and ultimately it just remains vacant. It just remains closed at this point, with no specific plans to actually do anything with it at this point, which genuinely is such a shame, because just having extra attractions is always a result, and it's always a win. The problem is that a lot of these attractions, they're kind of out of the way in Lost Continent. Like, Lost Continent never feels like there's a lot going on in there, so people wouldn't expect for there to actually be rides in there. The other thing that there used to be in there was the 8th Voyage of Sinbad. This was a live action stunt show, and I touched on it earlier, saying that they needed more kind of shows, and obviously they did used to have them. They have had them in this park, and this was located in the Sinbad's Bazaar section of Lost Continent. And this basically ran until 2018, and it was then closed, or I think the stage might still be there, but the queue area, or the extended queue area, was basically demolished to make space for Hagrid's. Talking of Hagrid's, if we head towards what used to be Merlinwood, which is now Hogsmeade. So once upon a time, in the Lost Continent, there used to be an area called Merlinwood, as I just said, and there used to be a ride called the Flying Unicorn, and there used to be the Dueling Dragons roller coasters, which is going to give a lot of people nostalgia here. And it also featured a restaurant called the Enchanted Oak Tavern. This was basically a giant tree stump with a face of Merlin on it. And genuinely, if you've never seen this, have a little look, because for 1999, mad. Absolutely mad. Like, the scale of this thing looks fantastic as well. Like, it really does look brilliant, and it is a shame, and it genuinely is a shame that this land isn't there anymore. However, very much like Jaws over in Universal Studios, it ultimately was replaced by something, in my opinion, that was better, and the thing that was better is Hogsmeade. So Hogsmeade basically came instead of Merlinwood. In 2010, that's when they actually opened the Wizarding World. I'm not 100% sure when they closed the Merlinwood area. Obviously, it would have been like 2 or 3 years before that. But like I said, there used to be a couple of attractions in there. It was closed, and then it was opened and rethemed as the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. Now, in the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, you've got now Flight of the Hippogriff, which is the same ride. It is the Flying Unicorn, but it's basically just been rethemed to a Harry Potter ride. The Dueling Dragons, and let's get on to the big one. This is the big one. The Dueling Dragons basically was 2 B&M inverted roller coasters. And when I say a B&M invert, it's basically, if you're from the UK, if you know Nemesis or Nemesis Reborn, Nemesis Inferno, I can't even remember. I think that's what they were all called. If you think of Nemesis at either Alton Towers or Fort Park, then you'll know what I mean. A B&M invert is basically, you got your legs dangling down, and these were big coasters. They were big coasters. So there was a blue side and there was a red side. So there was fire and ice, and they, as I said, they were dueling roller coasters. So dueling coasters, for anyone who might not have seen what dueling coasters is, basically is 2 rides that operate at exactly the same time with an element of near miss to each other. So they basically are 2 dragons dueling one another. They, I think, at 3 points had near misses with each other, and they got as close to 18 inches away from each other. 18 inches away from each other is nuts. That is, like, it's so close, and especially when you're traveling at high speeds as well. These rides, they used to go on for 2 minutes 25. They were long coasters as well. And anyone who knows these 2 rides will know that they genuinely were fantastic. The queue theming was brilliant. You get to basically walk through the queue, and then essentially when you get near the end, you get to choose whether or not you're going to ride fire or ice. And they were both different coasters as well. They weren't just a carbon copy of each other. They were different roller coasters, which is really cool. When the Wizarding World opened in 2010, they were actually rethemed. So they were still the same rides, but they were rethemed to Dragon Challenge. So they rethemed it as 2 of the dragons from the Goblet of Fire, the Tri-Wizard tournament. So you had the Chinese Fireball being the red one, or you had the Hungarian Horntail being the blue one. And I will say that they weren't as good as what they used to be, but I'm a big Harry Potter fan. So to see Harry Potter theming, I think was brilliant. I think it was fantastic to see like the Triwizard Cup and the actual Goblet of Fire as well in the queue line. I think that was cool. But unfortunately, there was an incident in 2011, and I don't know if a lot of you know this. And I haven't gone into any of these kind of things as of yet, but I do want to do an episode at some point where we get into kind of the bad and the ugly, because unfortunately in 2011 there was an instant when like loose articles, I don't know, coins or something like that, came out of like someone's pocket on the ride and actually hit someone on the other carriage, actually leaving someone blind and having to remove their eye. So in 2011 they basically decided that they would no longer run them simultaneously. They would run them one after the other. So they might be on the track at the same time, but they would not have the near miss element anymore, which is such a shame. And then they added the metal detectors in 2015 because they must have been finding a lot of people were dropping things, like people were carrying, I don't know, phones and stuff like that, and they were coming out of pockets on the ride itself. And it was one of those rides that obviously it went over sections of the park, so there is a risk of things falling out of pockets. Ultimately, this ride unfortunately closed in 2017, and they began to demolish this ride a week later. Literally, like, it closed, and within a week, this thing was coming down. However, it was replaced by Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure. Now, I've spoke about this a couple of times before, and I know that people were absolutely beside themselves when they opted to close this ride, or these rides. They were an absolute staple of Islands of Adventure. They were a day one attraction. They were one of the highlights of the park. And for them to basically close them, it felt like Islands of Adventure was going to lose a bit of its identity. But saying that, they went for an IP that was working, being Harry Potter. They went for Hagrid's, which, you know, people love Hagrid as a character, like an absolute staple. You're a wizard, Harry. And genuinely, they've smashed it out of the park. I love this ride. And obviously, everyone I speak to, guest-wise on the podcast, loves Hagrid's. Everyone loves Hagrid's. It's a fantastic ride. It's so unique. It's so unique being able to sit in the sidecar or the bike. I love it. I absolutely love it. And it is a shame that Dragon Challenge and Dueling Dragons for that was replaced. However, I do think it was the right move. Ultimately, you know, that coaster nowadays would have been 25 years old. It would have been rough as anything. They would have had to have retracked it. And I appreciate they obviously would have thought about it at some point, because they obviously did Hulk. So it would have been in their mind to do, but they opted not to do it. They opted to go, you know what? We've got Harry Potter here. We're gonna put something new here. And I, for one, am glad they did it. That being said, the dueling coaster setup, I think, is such a great idea. And for anyone who has been following on with the build of Epic Universe knows that Universal know what they're doing, because they have nailed it, because they are bringing a dueling roller coaster to Epic Universe. They have smashed it out of the park, and I'm so excited to go on this ride. It's going to be called Stardust Racers. This is a steel dueling launched roller coaster. This is a Mack Rides one. There's quite a lot of Mack Rides kind of roller coasters in and around Orlando, and it was originally announced in 2019, and basically it's now been unveiled that Stardust Racers is going to be in the Celestial Park part of the park. Very excited for this. Very excited for it. I think there's a yellow side and a green side. I mean, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They've opted to not go with like an IP on this necessarily, which is absolutely fine. If the ride itself is thrilling, that potentially could be enough. I think it's such a great idea. I'm so excited to ride this ride. And you know what? It was great fun having a little bit of a reminisce, looking at videos this morning of Dueling Dragons and kind of the Merlin Woods part of the park. Lost Continent, and genuinely just a little bit of a going off on a bit of a tangent. Lost Continent, it was a fabulous area, but it was massive. It was so big. And I think they did the right thing, obviously, by bringing the Harry Potter Wizarding World to Islands of Adventure. There's no doubt about that at all. However, the current Lost Continent area, they've got to call it. For me, they've got to call it a day on it. It is such a waste of space in the park, in my opinion, and it looks great still. Don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on the section, but it does need to be changed at this point. I'm sure there's no doubt in my mind that once Epic Universe is done, it'll probably be full steam ahead to retheme and redo Lost Continent, because it's such a big area of the park that it really does need to have something in there, because it's an entire land. It's an entire land that essentially has nothing in it in terms of attractions anymore. But yeah, so this basically sums up the Retro IOA episode. Like I said, there isn't as much in this park as what there was in Universal Studios, but it was fun to kind of just go through what things did used to be there. Like, there's a couple of things in there that I didn't even know used to be there, and it's fun knowing about things that have been updated over the years as well. I am planning on doing this kind of series for the Disney parks as well, so just bear with me. I try and basically release kind of one of these once a month amongst kind of other episodes. So yeah, so thank you all so much for listening, genuinely, and thank you for watching as well. The podcast, as I keep saying, is absolutely blowing up, and I cannot and I couldn't do it without any of you guys. So really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and keep sharing it, keep listening, keep telling everyone else about it, and we will take this podcast to the moon. So thank you again. Thank you for listening, and I will speak to you all in the next one.